What's going on, second grade? I have your history book with you. And so all you need to do is get your history book out. You're going to be turning to page 130. We left off before spring break. We were talking about people that were traveling west. You guys remember that? Who was the guy that we traveled west? He went from Virginia. He went up through the hills, knocking out trees, making his own path. Daniel Boone, right. He ended up in a state that started with a K. Anybody know? Kentucky. All right, Kentucky, you're right. So today we're going to be talking about a different group of people. They also traveled west because remember, people always lived on the East Coast. The West had not been discovered yet. There was not a lot of people in California that hadn't even been discovered. People hadn't even gone west. And why were they going west? There was too many people on the East. It was too crowded. There was too many people. They wanted more room. They wanted more land to build for their families and to have things and to grow farms. So they all started going west. But there wasn't a path there, so they had to make their own path. We talked about the wagons they took, how they put the wagons in a circle. Remember that? So they could eat and protect everybody. We talked about the people that actually took them, right? Back and forth. Everything. You guys remember all that? Okay. So we're doing a review, but today we're going to start talking about America's Cowboys. All right. Everybody say America's Cowboys. All right. So I'm going to read a little something to you really quickly, just the introduction, so you guys know exactly what we're talking about. It says today we'll be learning about another group of people who helped to build America. These people not only moved west, they helped to build America. Can you guess what group of people this might be? Well, Mr. Hunt already told you the answer, but it's the Cowboys. One of the places that we're going to learn about today is in a state that also starts with a K. It's not Kentucky. Can anybody guess? It's near Kentucky. It's in the Midwest. Kansas. All right, Kansas. We're going to talk about Kansas, and Kansas is in the middle of the country, middle America. And guess what they did in Kansas? They rode a lot of horses all the time back then. So we're going to talk about that right now. All right, so make sure you're on page 130, 131. Before we start, we always look down at our vocabulary. All right, our vocabulary for today is Texas. Everybody say Texas. All right. I think somebody in our class in our second grade knows about Texas and is happy we're talking about Texas today. And I see you right there. You don't smile too big, sir. All right. The next word is Cowboys. Everybody say Cowboys. And I think that same young man, Michael, you like a team in the NFL that is named the Cowboys. Man, this class might be for you today. All right. And then the last one is Longhorns. Everybody say Longhorns. All right, so we're going to look right now, and we've talked about this a little bit, but we're doing a review, remember? So we're doing a review. So look at the pictures. You see the pictures there. You see one, it's a picture of a man on a horse. He has his hat on. You see another one, he has a little brand in his hat. Remember we talked about branding? And then he has the little handkerchief around his neck, the cowboy hat, some rope. And then you see right there the man putting the brand on it. So we talked about this before, but we're doing the review, remember? So we're going to go back in so you guys remember. All right, so we're reading at the top. Many people were moving west. The West had good grazing land. What does that mean? Well, when horses, animals, cows, when they're outside, what they're doing is they're walking on all the farmland and they're grazing. They're walking slowly, putting their feet into the ground, making sure what's been planted goes down deep, and then they're eating the grass. And grazing is actually really helping all the food grow on the farms, all the culture, everything grows. So a lot of that happens out in the Midwest. Cannot happen in the city. Why not? Not enough room, too many buildings, not enough grass and land. All right. So the West had good grazing land. Texas was overrun with wild cattle. In the year 1800, if a man wanted to build a ranch, all he had to do was round up as many wild cows as he wanted. Guess what? Then the rancher would brand each one to show that he was now the cow's owner. So look over to your right. If you see on your picture, see something right there? See the lazy S, the rocking K, and the walking A. Those are different type of brands that they were using during this time, okay? Each rancher had his own brand to show which cows he owned. Brands were made up of signs or letters, and the brand was burned into the skin of a calf or cow. If you guys had a brand, what would it be? Would it be your initial for your name? Naomi Jackson, Michael Newton, Ada Blake, Solomon Blake. You could put SD or AB. Mackenzie Davis, MD, whatever you would do, you would put that on the cow. I remember you made your own brand. We tried to make a brand in class, but we didn't get to finish. But you would put your brand on it. So if the cow got lost, or if anybody else found your cow, they wouldn't steal your cow. They'd see the brand and know that this cow belonged to somebody. So that's how they made sure they knew which one was theirs. Because you could have hundreds of cows. And if you lose one, you wouldn't know. But if you have a brand on it, you know exactly where to look. So that's how they kept track. All right. In those days, there were no fences. The cattle would roam wherever they wanted to unless someone watched them. Men called cowboys were hired by the rancher to look after this branded cattle. And the cattle they looked after were called longhorns. So these cattle, they were called longhorns, and they were in Texas. So if you know there's a college in Texas, it's actually in a place called Austin, Texas. They're called the Texas Longhorns. So now you know where that name comes from. All right. The cattle they looked after were called longhorns. One look at their picture on the next page and you will know why. All right, we'll get there in a second. The people of the East had very little beef to eat, but there was plenty of beef in the West. And after the Civil War, the railroads made it possible to take cows from the West to the East. So the people who traveled from the East to the West ended up getting all this land. They ended up getting all this cattle, and then they were able to sell the cattle back to the East. So I think they did a very good job and made a wise choice in moving from where they were. So they started to make money and help other people, because people in the East, they wouldn't have had any food if it were not for those who went West. All right. It's just something fun to do. We tried doing this in class. We didn't get to finish it. You can try it now if you'd like to. It says design your own brand. Use your initials to design your own cattle brand. Write the name of your brand underneath it, of what you would do if you had to put something on. Like, I don't know about this. How many of you guys have toys in your room? I'll ask you this question. Do you have your name or your initials on your toys? If you do, that is sort of like a brand. You have made sure that you know exactly what's yours. So if you bring a toy or something to school, you know exactly where it's at. If it gets lost or it's taken or somebody says, oh, this is mine, you can say, nope, it has my initials on it. That's my brand. So that's similar to what they did on the cows. You've done it with your toys, your items at the house. This is the same thing they did. All right, so let's turn the page. All right, should be on page 132. All right, see? There were few towns in the West that had railroads. The towns that did have railroads to take the cows to the East were called cow towns. Dodge City, Kansas was the most famous cow town of all. All right, what was it like to go on a long drive to a cow town? Well, a rancher would hire cowboys to drive the cattle to a cow town. How long did it take to drive the cattle from a ranch to a cow town? Usually about 4 months. Wait a minute. I have to stop right there. They said that a rancher would hire cowboys to drive the cattle to a cow town. How long did it take? It took 4 months. Can you imagine anything taking 4 months? My goodness, that is crazy. That's a long time. But that's just because they didn't have the type of transportation that we have now, and they had to take their time, but they got it done. The rancher or the owner of the cows would be the cowboy's boss for the next 4 months. The rancher would also hire a cook who drove a chuck wagon, which was a kitchen on wheels. The cowboys ate bacon, beans, and bread almost every day. And of course, there was always plenty of coffee and beefsteak. The cowboys, they rode all day. Their horses would often become too tired to keep riding, so they needed rest. So each cowboy usually took 3 horses with him. And while he was riding one horse, the other 2 horses would be resting. The rancher would also hire a man called a wrangler. Everybody say wrangler. All right. It was a wrangler's job to look after the extra horses. So the wrangler, what would happen is if the horses were roaming around too far, the wrangler's job was, you see this in the old videos, they take the rope and they twirl it around their head and they just go out there and try to, keep the horses in track so they don't go too far off. And you make sure everything stays together. All right. Stampede. Everybody say stampede. All right. A real cowboy loved his job. And one thing he feared, though, was a stampede. In a stampede, the cattle became wild. Sometimes they even ran over the edge of a cliff. Ooh, that sounds crazy, because they would end up killing themselves. I'm going to try to show you guys a video of a stampede in the back of this. So look for that video and that link in the clip after this. All right. Well, what caused the stampede? Sometimes a sudden sound like like thunder before a storm would start cattle and they would run because they get scared. You hear that loud noise, you hear that crack, you like shh, and you take off running. Sometimes just a person's voice could do it. And if one cow started running, the others would too. All right. Sometimes one cow would become a troublemaker and cause the others to stampede. And one thing was sure, if the Cowboys caught the troublemaker, that cow would become beefsteak. Ooh, what does that mean? That means that if a cow got wild and messed up everything else, that cow might be dinner. So that's pretty crazy. But you know what? It is actually what they had to do. If you have hundreds of cows and one cow makes all the cows act crazy, that's too much work. And if it takes you 4 months to travel, you don't want to waste any more time dealing with one cow messing everything up. All right. All right. Let's turn the page. All right. So there's some questions on the back. And I want you guys to take a look at that. Well, we'll ask you the questions now. Just go through it. All right. So, first question. What did a rancher use to show which cows were his? Anybody know? Remember? Raise your hand. It's in the book. It's something that you might have on your toys, your items in your house. It's a brand. You put your name or your initials or something that shows that this is yours. So whatever you wanted to do. If you had a company, maybe you put a stamp of your company on the horse. But usually it was just the initials or something that would show this is my cattle. This is my cow. All right. This would be an easy one for number 2. What were the men called who looked after the cattle? Cowboys. All right. So that is what a cowboy is. A cowboy is a person or a man or a woman. Usually they were men because they're out in the wilderness. They're out in the forest. So that was lot of lot of work to be outside all those hours, all the time. So usually the men were the cowboys and they were out there taking care of the cattle, looking after them. So that's what a cowboy is. All right. Number 3. What were the towns called that had railroads to transport cows to the east? We didn't talk about this too much, but there were special towns that had railroads. Not every town in the West had railroads. They had more railroads in the East, but in the West, they didn't have many. But when they did have it, they called it what? If the cows came into the town, it would be called a cow town, right? Cow towns. So those are the type of places that were called that had railroads to get all the cows back east. And then what? Number 4. Which man looked after the extra horses on the cattle drive? I'll give you a hint. What's this called? Don't say Mr. Hunter acting crazy either. All right. This is called a wrangler. All right. A wrangler. You know what's pretty crazy now? There are actually a pair of jeans that are called wranglers. All right. So when you see that, you can think about that's what I think. These are cowboy jeans. All right. Number 5. What would happen or what could happen when a sudden noise startled the cattle? Stampede. Cows, horses, everybody running crazy, and just the cowboys and the wranglers trying to get them all together. And the cows and the excuse me, and the cattle, they weigh over 500 pounds, 600 pounds, sometimes even higher than that, 1,000 pounds, and they're running. Don't you think it'd be pretty dangerous? Yeah, so it's not as easy as just telling them to stop. They would run you over. So you would have to have special tricks, special ways to get them to stop. Excuse me. And the last one, how long did a cattle drive take? I don't think you guys remember this. How long did a cattle drive take? 4 months. Never forget that. It took 4 months, which that trip now probably takes to go to the east, maybe a couple days. Maybe a couple days with all the animals, maybe a couple days. In some instances, with the way we travel, you could probably get some cows there, the same day if you needed to. But usually maybe a couple days. But 4 months, that's about 120 days, which is crazy. So go from 2 to 3 days to 120 days, big difference. All right. That is our lesson for today. Make sure you check the bottom with the YouTube link for the Stampede and maybe some other cool things in there too. All right. I'll see you tomorrow.